name is Meekela, this is Meekela Reads, I live here, this is my channel. It has been a hot minute since I've spoken about my thoughts on the books that I've read here on this corner of the internet. So we're back. I have 29 books to talk about. Because of that, this is going to be much more condensed in description than typical. Some of these have reading vlogs entirely dedicated to them, so I will also leave those available for you to peruse if you feel the need to know more about my thoughts. I will also let everyone know that in 31 days I will be flying to the UK. That's just an exciting thing that's happening, but I feel like we're friends. We can talk about this. This is friend things to talk about. I'm going overseas, it's very exciting. Okay, books, let's talk about books. The first book I have actually already spoken about, and I spoke about it in my May wrap up at the very end, even though technically I finished it in June. It is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. I will leave the link for this here. Just save you from having to dig and find it. It's at the end of the video. So that's where all of my thoughts about this are. It was fine. Then I listened to I Give My Marriage a Year by Holly Wainwright. Before I get into my thoughts and the plot of this book, this cover is like spitting image of this book's cover. And I don't know if they have the same person or if they've copyrighted it, but it's sus. Where do I even start on my thoughts for I Give My Marriage a Year? This is an adult fiction book based around normal life things. We follow main character Lou, who at the start of this book is contemplating ending or continuing her marriage of 14 years to her husband. They have 2 children together, and right from the start we find out that she is cheating on her husband with another guy. So I was turned off from the start. And like that should have been the first red flag for me to put this book down. Like that should have been it. I shouldn't have continued, but I did. I don't know. I really disliked the main character. I disliked the relationship that she had with her husband. It felt at the same time incredibly real life, but then also just terrible. The communication between them was not there, despite the fact that we got to know them over the 14 years of their marriage and how long that they were together. We get the history from start to finish of their marriage, everything that's happened. I hated the premise of literally testing your husband for 3 months before he realizes that you're evaluating the marriage without speaking to him about it. Like, that's wrong on so many levels. That straight up should have been a conversation that they just had from the start. Like in a typically functioning relationship, you would think that if you were having issues in the marriage and you wanted to see if you could fix them, you would do that together. That would be a 2-person thing. One person can't fix a thing that 2 people are a part of. That's just not how it works. So that was I Give My Marriage a Year. I do not recommend this book. Unless that is something that you're into, just don't, I wouldn't go there. Next, I read these 4 books as a part of Reading Alison Page's favorite books. As I said, many thoughts within a nice 20-minute video. I'm gonna leave it up here if you want to go watch it. But one of these became my favorite, like one of my favorite books. It was this one. Next, we continued the yearly reread of the A Court of Thorns and Roses series with Akawar, Akafas, and Akasaf all in one. I would have the other 2, but I've lent them to other people, so I don't currently have them in my possession, nor do I actually read them physically anymore. I always listen to them when I reread. Well-known series. That's kind of a prerequisite to be on BookTube and BookTok these days, so if you haven't heard of it, just maybe look it up. I read these every year. It happens around about like the change from autumn to winter, like that rough time of year. That's when I get the urge to reread A Court of Thorns and Roses. For comfort, I read the next 3. Nothing has changed. Literally nothing has changed from last year. And I will acknowledge that I have read A Court of Silver Flames 3 times in the last 12 months. And I think that's too many. And then I listened to Educated by Tara Westover. This is a autobiography, memoir written by Tara Westover, and it outlines and chronicles her childhood that is just rife with mental illness and dysfunction. Tara and her siblings worked with their father in a junkyard and scrapped metal for a living, which was incredibly dangerous. None of them believed in hospitals or the government, and it was just wild. I found this book fascinating. I really enjoyed listening to how Tara, I guess, grew in that space, what sort of became of that, and then how she managed it. Like, we get the full spectrum from the start to finish. She deals with so much trauma and grief, and having your family be both the thing that helps you, but then also the thing that does not help you. It does the opposite of help you. I loved this. It was fantastic. I cannot recommend it enough to anyone who is interested in reading autobiographies or memoirs, or even is just interested in that brief, rough synopsis that I have just given you. Then I read The Wicked King and Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. They are books 2 and 3 in the Cruel Prince series, which is basically fairies. Fairy world, fairyland. We follow our main character Jude in this. She is a human living in fairyland, and she lives there with her twin sister and older sister who is a fairy. Her twin sister is obviously not a fairy, she's a human. Jude has grown up in this fairy world, learning how to make her way and to find her place because she wants to kind of belong. She wants to be there. Books 2 and 3 are much stronger than book 1. I think I like 2 better than 3. But 3 we got a lot more of the stuff that I liked, but 2 was just better overall. The series did get better as it progressed, which I really enjoyed. I guess like my overall thoughts about the whole series in general, like not my favorite, didn't love it, but Carden is growing on me. If I could just get more of Carden without the rest of the books, I would do that. I would do that. I then read all of these plus these as a part of the Summer Splash readathon I did in July. That was all of July. These are all the books that I read in July. There is in fact already a wrap up for these, so again, it's here. You know what to do. But the TLDR of it, I really enjoyed Book Lovers. It was the palette cleanser that I needed at the point in my reading life this year, and it was better than the other Emily Henry that I've read. Persepolis was more than I had expected, but I'm so glad that I picked it up, and I feel like I've learned a lot more about the world just from reading this, so for that I'm incredibly grateful. You're the Only One I've Told, though written before the Roe v. Wade overturn, was still so incredibly relevant and eye-opening, and I think that everyone can learn something from this, and for me it just really reaffirmed all of my values, which was amazing. I did not like the Poppy War. Kirsty and I read this, we buddy read it, and I just felt like I never knew what the f was going on. Spent the whole time confused, had to literally Google the plot every now and then to remember what has happened and where we're at. The Little Prince, as predicted, was adorable. My year of rest and relaxation felt a little bit too much like work for my liking. Lore Olympus was phenomenal, and I literally had to restrain myself from reading the next volume and then every other chapter on Webtoon that there was before the end of July, otherwise that would have been everything that I had done. And finally, I would have liked the Sad Ghost Club more if I was about 5 or 6 years younger than I am now. Would have been incredibly relevant back then. Still really nice, still would recommend. So that was Summer Splash in a very quick nutshell. As I said, there's more thoughts. Check out that video if you want more of that. Next, I read all of Lore Olympus, and I don't just mean like I read these 2 volumes, I read all of Lore Olympus. At that point in time, there was 200 chapters on Webtoon. I had read up to about 50. I spent days just glued to my phone right here. My entire life became Lore Olympus. I went to a concert to see Gang of Youths. The lights on stage were pink and blue, and I was like, it's Lore Olympus. This is it. My life is Lore Olympus. I abandoned every responsibility that I had to read this webcomic. But realistically, the series is so in-depth. There are so many themes, so many topics. There are many trigger warnings, so please look at those. Keep your brain safe. Make sure you're taking care of yourself. The illustrations and the color palette are just phenomenal, and you can absolutely tell, and I know this from doing it over a very short period of time, you notice that from the start of the first volume up until where she's posting now, such a huge difference, such an improvement in the art style. I wait week to week for it now. It's torture. That's where we're at with Lore Olympus. It's one of my new favorite graphic novels. Next, I listened to These Twisted Bonds by Alexi Ryan. This is the second book in the These Hollow Vows duology. Yet another fairy fantasy romance. This one, to be honest, I would say is probably actually a crossover of A Court of Thorns and Roses and The Cruel Prince. Like, there's some themes from both of them that are quite prominent within this book. I was so angry at the main character because I thought, like, the end of the first book, we alluded to the love interest, because there's a love triangle, we alluded to the love interest that I liked being, you know, kind of the up and coming. We'll get some more of it. I spent 90% of this book still stuck with the other love interest who is just abusive and really not a good person. 90% of the book. And then I had my little 10% somewhere in that mix of the one that I actually liked. So disappointing. I thought we were done with the crappy love interest, but I was wrong. If that's your vibe, if the A Court of Thorns and Roses Cruel Prince thing is your vibe, then sis, go for it. That is all you. If you're not into that kind of thing and you think A Court of Thorns and Roses is good because you read it 6 years ago and then every other fairy thing at the moment just doesn't compare, don't bother. Or do bother if you're trying to fill the void. But nothing fills the void. Nothing fills the void. Nothing. And then I read Yoke, which is a family-based contemporary fiction book following two sisters, Jane and June. At the start of the book, we find out that Jane has cancer. She's just been diagnosed, and it thrusts her and June back together into each other's lives. They're both living in New York City, and to be honest, it was just a little bit too much of an unhinged girly book for me to like at this point in time, because I had just gotten done with my year of rest and relaxation, which was yet another unhinged girly book. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I struggled through Yoke. I really disliked the main character, and I think that was intentional. I think that is a part of her character and a part of that profile, and I think I needed this to not be an unhinged girly book. I think I probably should have read a different book at this point in time. If I read it again at some point in the future when I'm less impacted by all of the unhinged girly books, this will be fine. But it just wasn't when I read it. And then to balance all of that out, I read Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. To correct that, I actually listened to Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, which was the contemporary young adult fluff that I just needed after the unhinged girlies. So Radio Silence follows our main girl Frances, and she is a artist in high school who makes fan art for her favorite YouTube web series. Then she also makes friends in summer with her very reclusive neighbor, who is actually the best friend of her enemy at school, because they're both like competing to be the top person at school, because Frances is like super smart. Her neighbor's name is Alad, and they have such a fast friendship. They become best friends, they hang out, they spend all of the time together, everything is just really easy. And the thing that I really liked about this is that it wasn't a romance. It wasn't a romantic thing, it was just purely friendship, and it was just refreshing. It was easy, it was predictable, it did deal with like enough deep themes to make it worth reading, and it dealt with actually triggers for like family violence and domestic violence and like some pretty heavy themes in that sense, but all in all, still very lovely. However, I will disclaim that I do think that I'm outgrowing YA, and so I really quickly need to go through all of the YA on my shelves before it is too late, before I will no longer enjoy them. Next, I listened to The Crown's Game and then also The Crown's Fate by Evelyn Skye. So The Crown's Game is a fictional urban fantasy that almost is disguised as like a historical fiction at the same time. It follows two main characters that are enchanters. They have to enter the Crown's Game to compete to become the Tsar's enchanter, which basically means that they compete to become the right-hand man or woman of the Tsar. This has been sitting on my shelf for longer than I care to admit. This is really reminiscent of Caraval in a way, but I would actually probably align it more to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern in the sense of the two magicians that are kind of competing with each other. I also, after I finished this, I then listened to the sequel, which I don't currently own. It was a lot darker in its themes and its content. To be honest, you could probably read the first one if you like liked it and you were satisfied with that story. I was not, so I read the second one, and I think that while interesting for the story, I don't think it was overly necessary unless you wanted like the nice fluffy wrap up of everything at the end to see where things actually went. I genuinely did really enjoy this one. I think that the cast potentially was a bit limited, despite the fact that it felt like a fever dream in the first couple of chapters where they threw like 6 points of view at you and you were like, who's who in the zoo? I don't know what's happening right now. But that would be like among one of my only criticisms. I loved the magic component. I thought that that was fantastic, and a lot of the imagery that came from the magical creations and stuff, phenomenal. Loved that section. I think that that's my favorite part of the series. More so in the first one, less so in the second one. The second one didn't have much of that at all. Again, much less fun, much less bubbly, much more dark. And then I finally finished Blood Promise by Rochelle Mead. This took months. Definitely the weakest in the series. So Blood Promise is number 4 in the Vampire Academy series. I'm doing a reread with the Booked and Busy podcast Discord people, and I'm also doing it so I can finally finish reading the series off of my shelf, because I have the last one in the Bloodline series that I haven't read yet, and I need to read the whole series because I don't remember what happens. It's a whole thing. It's also very fitting that I'm reading this series now because the new Netflix series comes out this month, and I didn't realize that when I had started the reread. So that was just a nice coinky dink for everyone. In Blood Promise, we once again leave the setting of the academy. We follow Rose on an adventurous journey, and for that reason I actually think that the book was kind of a bit slow. We don't have our usual dynamics of our usual characters. Rose was quite depressed throughout most of the book. It picked up page 350. This 500-page book, I had to read 350 pages to get to the good stuff. It was too much, too long. It could have been shorter, and it is my least favorite in the series. And I don't know when we're starting the next one, but I hope that it's soon, because I have a lot of reading to do before the end of the year. I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more of these books to read before I can finally read the one that's been on my shelf once again for nearly a decade. Then I listened to How to Fail by Elizabeth Day, which is basically like the book version of her podcast, How to Fail. I haven't actually listened to the podcast yet, but I will be after listening to this book. I really enjoyed this, particularly in audiobook form, because in the book there's excerpts from her podcast, and in the audiobook she actually takes clips from the podcast and inserts them into the like little excerpt section. It was so relatable. It was hilarious. It was so raw and vulnerable, which I really appreciated. And in the period of actually listening to this, I genuinely changed the way that I looked at failure, which really helped with this transition to the new job that I'm currently in, because fear of failure is something that I hold very near and dear to my heart. Can't say that that's had a lasting impact, but watch this space. We'll see how we go. And finally, the last book that I read in this period of time that I'm going to tell you about, the last book we're talking about today is And the Mountains Echoed by Khaled Hosseini, which I read as a part of the Pocket Pages book club run by Ali from Alice and Pages. This is actually my first Hosseini book. I have The Kite Runner and another one on my shelf as well by him, but this is the first one that I have read, and it was fabulous. This is set in Afghanistan. It follows a range of different perspectives spanning from the 1950s right up until like the early 2010s, I believe. And though we're following many different people in this time, they're all linked in some way to the two main characters that we meet at the start, Abdullah and his little sister Pari. I did struggle a bit initially, but I did eventually get into it, probably about halfway. Again, enjoyed it much more when I figured out who was who and where was where and what was happening in what space, in what time, with what person, and how they were linked to the other people around them. And despite the fact that there were so many different perspectives, all of the stories and the timelines flowed so nicely, and it was really nice that you would jump from one time period to the next and you could see characters in the newer, like later on time period that you had seen earlier in the book, and it was beautiful. I really enjoyed it. Like as a whole, I think individually when I was reading it I wasn't having the best time, but as a whole I'm really appreciating how masterfully this was actually written. I finished reading this when I was like in bed. Jared was already asleep beside me and I just started sobbing. The whole end of the book, just like tears streaming silently down my face. I had a good time. I really enjoyed And the Mountains Echoed, and I am equally as excited to jump into the other ones because I hear that they're better. But that's it. These are the books that I've read since I've been gone. Yeah, that's all the books that I've read. I've read more books since then. Fear not, we're still going. I have some exciting videos planned. I'm excited. But thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a long one, so if you've stuck around this long, kudos to you. I don't know if I would have stuck around listening to me ramble for this long, so thanks, pal. But yes, as I said, that's it. We're done. You are free to leave now. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you're having a fantastic day or night or whatever time it is where you are in the world. Currently night here. I will see you in the next one. Bye!